could you openly and honestly admit that Mr Corbyn lost Labour the election and you must move the party to the centre to stop Boris Johnson enjoying 10 years as Prime Minister? Lisa Nandy, what's your response?
Well, there's no question that Jeremy came up on the doorstep and questions of leadership came up on the doorstep on nearly every door that we knocked on in the general election, and that wasn't just true in my constituency in Wigan, one of those red wall seats. It was true everywhere that I campaigned. But it wasn't just that. I mean, we'd had 4 years of nastiness towards ourselves and each other. For a party that claimed to want to build a more compassionate, fairer society, that was really existential. The issue of anti-Semitism came up on door after door after door, even in areas where there wasn't a big Jewish population, because people really didn't like it and they wanted to see us change. It wasn't just that either. Brexit came up over and over again. We'd managed to get ourselves into a position on Brexit where Leavers thought we were Remainers, where Remainers thought we were Leavers. And right across this country, wherever you were, people felt profoundly disrespected by it.
So who's to blame then for that Brexit? I mean, you've got the shadow Brexit secretary standing next to you. Is he to blame?
Well, it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. And I think there is a collective failure of leadership on Brexit that we have to own up to as a party. But let's be honest too, this has been a really long time coming. For decades, people in towns like mine and towns like Dewsbury have been saying that Labour is no longer of or for our communities. I want that to change. That's why I'm standing to be leader of the Labour Party. I don't want to move Labour to the centre. I think people see the need for fundamental radical change in this country, but I would like to move Labour to the north.
You said the Brexit policy was a disaster. Do you hold Keir Starmer responsible for it?
William, I went out with 44 teams across 44 constituencies in the general election, and all of the campaign teams were talking about what's coming up on the doors. Of course they were. It was a very lively conversation. And across the United Kingdom, and some of you may have knocked on doors, there was uniformity. There were 4 things that were coming up. The number one was the leadership of the Labour Party. And anybody who was in the campaign can't say otherwise. Whether that was fair or unfair is secondary. That was the number one issue, I'm afraid. Brexit came up. Of course it came up, and I completely accept it came up. But it came up differently in Dewsbury to the way it came up in Scotland, and that was one of the difficulties for our party.
Do you take responsibility?
I will come to that.
Okay.
I won't duck that in the slightest. The third thing that came up, and this is the teams that I was with reporting to me, and they were all open about it, was the manifesto was overloaded. It had good stuff in, but there was too much. It got to a tipping point where people didn't believe it, and therefore it didn't matter what was in it because it wasn't being believed. And I'm very sad to say the fourth thing that was coming up was anti-Semitism. And it came up as a values issue, and it came up as a competence issue. So far as Brexit is concerned, what we were trying to do was to protect ourselves from what Johnson was going to do. I didn't vote for Boris Johnson's deal because I thought that it was a very bad deal and it would end up in a really bad place. Now today, the white paper's been published, and it's obvious where Johnson's going to go next. It's got no deal, or nearly no deal, written all over it, and it's communities in Dewsbury and elsewhere that are going to pay the price. And that's why I didn't vote for Johnson's deal, because as soon as I saw what he'd put on the table, I thought it would end in the way that's been set out today.
The questions about Labour's Brexit policy, do you take responsibility for the policy as Shadow Brexit Secretary that Lisa Nandy has just described as a disaster?
I take responsibility for everything in our manifesto. It was actually a Shadow Cabinet decision. It was actually a decision of our whole party at party conference. But I'm not going to shirk from that. But I do. Since we're looking at what happens next, Leave Remain is over. So that divide is not there. We've left the EU, so whether you were for Remain or Leave is irrelevant. But there's a big test coming up for all of us.
OK, because we have spent a long time with you.
The question is, now Johnson is heading for no deal or nearly no deal. If we become leader of the Labour Party, will we take him on or we will give in to him? And that's the question we need to answer.
OK. Keir Starmer just said that the Shadow Cabinet was responsible for Labour's Brexit policy. As someone in the Shadow Cabinet, do you see yourselves as equally responsible?
Well, look, I think we need to recognise that there were many reasons as to why we lost this general election, and Brexit was one of the key ones. I come from a Leave constituency, and I could feel the anger on the doorstep from my constituents. They saw us in Parliament playing parliamentary games, they didn't understand why, and they thought we were trying to attempt to overturn the result of the referendum. And if you were a strong Remain supporter, well, you didn't think we were going far enough in having that close relationship with the European Union. But the sad fact is that with that lack of trust in Brexit, it took so many other things down with it. And yes, leadership did come up on the doorstep because we'd had 4 years of Jeremy being vilified and attacked by the press. We knew that we weren't trusted on issues such as anti-Semitism and our handling of that within the party. And on our manifesto, the sad thing is that despite it being the most transformative manifesto we've had in a generation, with the right answers to the right questions that society was facing, we didn't explain ourselves, and we didn't have a message that spoke to communities and spoke about their aspiration.
Although you've had the worst election results since 1935, and you say that the manifesto was great.
I tell you what, nobody voted against having a better quality of life, and we should have explained how the policies in that manifesto would have delivered that.
Okay.
But on the question about should we move to the centre, the Tories are laying a trap for us. They try to page themselves as the anti-establishment party in this general election. We were the party that didn't listen to our voters or our communities. And we can't fall into that trap. And the only way we avoid that trap is by having a bold, transformative vision of what the future will look like. And when we talk about left, centre, right, whatever you like, I'll let you into a little secret. Those policies, investing in education, investing in infrastructure, reindustrialising huge parts of the north, they weren't left-wing or radical.
Okay.
They were sensible economic policies that have been adopted by other countries in the European Union. And if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us.
Okay.